Howdy. Or good morning for the folks who are live streaming from across the country and don't have the good fortune of being in Texas. Welcome to this Texas Forum on Internet Regulation. My name is Ajit Pai. I am one of the commissioners of the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C. I'd like to begin this forum by thanking Texas A&M's Bush School of Government and Public Service for hosting this morning's forum, as well as the George Bush Presidential Library Foundation, in particular Fred McClure and Kristen King, for the assistance in organizing this event. As a longtime admirer of our nation's 41st president, it is truly an honor to be with you here today. For those of us who have the privilege of holding public office, George H.W. Bush's career is a model to be emulated. Whether he was putting together the broad coalition overseas that helped to win the first Gulf War, or working at home to pass landmark bipartisan legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act, President Bush displayed every day the professionalism and the commitment to principle that we should expect of our nation's leaders. These are the same values that the Bush School instills in its students today. Moreover, President Bush's work after leaving the White House shows that holding public office isn't a prerequisite to serving the American people. From assisting victims of Hurricane Katrina to promoting volunteerism, President Bush has been one of the 1,000 points of light that he spoke about during his address to the 1988 Republican Convention, although his star shines certainly brighter than most. There's one other thing about him that I should mention. Anyone who jumps out of an airplane on his 90th birthday is certainly a lot more courageous than I am. Now, we are gathered here this morning to discuss regulation of the internet. It therefore bears mention that the World Wide Web, including the first web browser, the first web server, and some of the first web pages, were developed during President Bush's time in office. And back then, of course, few could have imagined how quickly the internet would become critical to our nation's economy, our culture, and our political discourse. But today, almost every part of American life is touched by broadband. And I think that's what makes this forum so important. Now, our hearing this morning will focus on the Federal Communications Open Internet proceeding. The main questions at hand are whether the FCC should regulate internet service providers' network management practices, and if so, what those rules should be. Twice, the FCC has gone down this road, and twice we have lost in court. Now, the third time around, some have suggested that the FCC should classify broadband service as a telecommunications service and subject internet service providers to public utility regulation, otherwise known as Title II. Some have said that we should pursue other regulatory avenues. Others have said that rules would be a solution in search of a problem. And still others have said that if there's a problem here to solve, we should first go back to Congress for guidance. Now, to explore these topics, I am joined by an outstanding panel of experts from our Lone Star State. And I'm very grateful to them for agreeing to participate, to gig 'em while talking gigabits, if you will. Now, my role this morning is primarily to listen and to learn, not to speak, so I will try to keep these opening remarks brief. But I did want you to know that I've come to Texas because I believe it's important for the FCC to get outside the Beltway and to directly engage Americans who will be impacted by our rules, not just Washington insiders. And that's why I was disappointed when the FCC decided to hold each one of its recent net neutrality roundtable discussions at our Washington headquarters. And that's why I wish that my colleagues were here with me today. On this issue and other critical issues, the FCC should not be hiding in our nation's capital. No, it should. No. And I should note in this regard that my friend and colleague, Commissioner Michael O'Reilly, statement that he wanted me to share with you. And the statement reads as follows. I regret that I'm unable to attend this forum on internet regulation. When it was announced, I had a previous commitment to attend the 2014 ITU Plenipotentiary Conference in Busan, Korea. I'm disappointed to miss visiting the Lone Star State again, but I trust that today's forum, which features a range of panelists with a diversity of viewpoints, will generate a fulsome discussion on net neutrality. He certainly will be missed, but I know that he is here in spirit. Now, today I expect to hear some disagreements among our panelists as to what path the FCC should take when it comes to internet regulation. But before we explore those disagreements, I'd like to start off mentioning a few areas where I think that there is likely to be common ground. First, there is broad support for a free and open internet. In 2004, FCC Chairman Michael Powell outlined 4 principles of internet freedom: the freedom to access lawful content, the freedom to use applications, the freedom to attach personal devices to the network, and the freedom to obtain service plan information. 1 year later, the FCC unanimously endorsed these 4 principles, and a bipartisan consensus has supported them ever since. And I submit that respect for these 4 internet freedoms has aided the internet's tremendous growth over the last decade. It has shielded online competitors from anti-competitive practices. It has fostered long-term investments in broadband infrastructure. It has made the internet an unprecedented platform for civic engagement, for commerce, for entertainment, and for online innovation. And speaking of online innovation, it has made the United States the epicenter of that kind of innovation. We should support the 4 internet freedoms, and I personally am committed to protecting them going forward. Second, we must remove barriers to deploying and investing in broadband networks. We need to set rules that encourage the private sector to expand and to upgrade the infrastructure that underlies the internet. We can't rest on our laurels. There must continue to be a business case for investing the tens of billions of dollars necessary to bring broadband access to more Americans, to increase broadband speeds, to give consumers more choices. In short, to give all Americans the benefit of the broadband era. In other words, we need to focus also on net capacity, net neutrality. Third, when it comes to internet regulation, the FCC should be open and transparent. The FCC currently has rules on the books that require broadband service providers to be transparent about how they manage their networks. And we should live up to that same standard. For example, the FCC has proposed a number of rules and has asked the public to comment on them. If the agency would like to make any changes to those proposed rules, it should make those changes public and allow for a new round of public comment. Any rules that we adopt in this area could have a substantial impact on our nation's economy and our future. And so it is critical that we receive a thorough public vetting of those proposals. Too often, FCC regulations are the product of last-minute backroom deals, and that shouldn't happen here. We shouldn't let well-paid lobbyists have inside information about what the Commission will be voting on while keeping the American people in the dark. Now, turning back to today's forum, it is now time to introduce our panelists and to listen to their opening remarks. Following those remarks, I will ask each of them some questions and then allow them to respond to each other's views. And then we will open it up to the audience to ask questions. I'm looking forward to a lively but civil discussion of these important issues, where everyone, in the spirit of President Bush, will be able to disagree without just being disagreeable. After all, whether these are Longhorns, Bears or Mustangs, Red Raiders or Cougars, today we're all Texans. So with that, I will start with our first panelist, starting to my right, your left, the Honorable Donna L. Nelson, who is the chairman of the Texas Public Utility Commission in Austin. Chairman Nelson was appointed by Governor Rick Perry to the Public Utility Commission on August 15, 2008. And she was named chairman on July 26, 2011. Prior to her appointment, Chairman Nelson served as a special assistant and advisor to the governor on energy and telecommunications issues. She also assisted the governor's competitiveness council with the preparation of the Texas 2008 State Energy Plan. She previously served as director of the PUC's telecommunications section and as legal advisor to the PUC chairman. Chairman Nelson sits on the board of the Electric Reliability Council of Texas and is the president of the Southwest Power Pool Regional State Committee. She's active with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, where she's a member of the Committee on Energy Resources and the Environment and the Task Force on Environmental Regulation and Generation. Chairman Nelson is a member of the Texas Bioenergy Policy Council and the Texas Broadband Task Force. She's also on the advisory board of the Annual Baseline Assessment of Choice in Canada and the United States. Additionally, Chairman Nelson is a former Assistant Attorney General of Texas, where she specialized in antitrust law. She also worked as a legislative assistant to She is a licensed attorney and a past member of the Texas Council on Autism and Pervasive Developmental Delays. Chairman Nelson received a bachelor's degree from Black and a law degree from Texas Tech. She resides in Austin with her son, John. Chairman Nelson, the floor is yours for any opening remarks you care to make.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this incredibly important discussion. I thank the FCC for venturing outside of DC to gather additional feedback as part of its open internet proceeding. In particular, I thank you, Commissioner Pai, and your staff for leading the discussion here in the Lone Star State. Texas is a very appropriate venue for this discussion. Over the last 15 years, Texas has transitioned its communications and energy markets that fundamentally drive the economic success of Texas, from regulated to competitive industries, and in so doing, we have demonstrated two things. First, competitive markets work better than regulated markets, and second, regulation needs to be predictable, even-handed, and limited to accomplish defined goals. We cannot lose sight of the fact that regulation is a substitute for competitive markets. Unnecessary regulation impedes competition by increasing costs, erecting barriers to entry, ultimately limiting customer choice and driving up the costs of goods and services. The success of communications and energy policy in this state is tied to an overarching deregulatory approach to economic development that Governor Perry and the Texas legislature have implemented over the past 2 decades. Millions of jobs have been created throughout Texas because of this approach. Texas experienced more job growth at all pay levels than any other state in the nation from 2000 to 2013. CNBC named Texas the top state for infrastructure. Forbes ranked Texas #1 in economic climate, and Chief Executive Magazine has named Texas the best state for business 10 years in a row. Google, AT&T, and cable are investing billions of dollars to deploy networks in cities across Texas to meet the ever-increasing customer demand for faster networks. Austin is a leading startup hub because of this approach. Those are more than accolades, and they demonstrate a further truth. When faced with limited capital, electric and communication companies are investing their dollars in Texas because Texas has a top-down commitment and appreciation for the significance of a reasoned approach to regulation and competitive markets. Smart regulation has been critical to achieving and sustaining these gains. When markets work well, we deregulate and make sure the hand of government stays off or remains minimal. In this way, our broadband and other technology-related efforts reflect the clear mandate for the internet articulated by Commissioner Pai in the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That statute made clear that the internet was to remain unfettered from federal or state regulation. The regulatory framework that emerged thereafter, and I've been doing this since that point, a minimalist approach administered at the federal level, kick-started an incredible amount of investment, innovation, and competition that continues to this day. We must not forget that. Texas's electric and communication industries provide great examples of how a free market approach can yield positive results for customers. In Texas, we believe that customers and not the government should pick winners and losers. As former Texas PUC and FERC Chairman Pat Wood said, competition on its worst day is better than regulation on its best. Looking at communications, has been a leader in moving the communications industry toward a competitive market. The majority of customers in Texas live in areas that have competitive landline service. Our legislature has worked tirelessly to deregulate that market as the video and communication markets converged to offer customers bundled services. The triple play rolled, oh my goodness, my time has gone fast. The triple play rolled out quickly because of the foresight of our legislature to allow companies to obtain a statewide video franchise. We were the first state to do that. I was going to talk a little bit about our electric market too, and maybe I'll do that in response to questions, but let me talk about the broadband market. As we've moved away from regulation in the telecommunications and electric industries, some are calling for increased regulation in the broadband industry. In fact, some propose to place the broadband sector into a regulatory scheme that was established to regulate utilities, Title II, a scheme that was built in a different time for a different type of service. However, broadband and IP-enabled services like VoIP provide great examples of market-driven success due in no small part to the hands-off nature of regulation in these segments based on policies that were set when the industry was in its infancy. The indicia of success that we see in Texas in our telecommunications and electric industries, we see with equal force in the broadband industry. A hands-off regulatory approach that results in hundreds of billions of dollars of private investment in networks and vibrant competition among different platforms, cable, DSL, fiber, mobile, and satellite on both product offerings and price. The outcome is innovative products, competitive prices, and higher speeds for customers. These conditions are evidence of a healthy market. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman Nelson. Next, we will turn to Mr. Stuart Youngblood of the Dallas Entrepreneur Center in Dallas, Texas. Mr. Youngblood is an ambassador for the Dallas Entrepreneur Center, which focuses on stimulating job creation and economic growth in Dallas. He previously served as the program director for Tech Wildcatters, a Forbes Top 10 ranked seed fund and technology accelerator, which provides resources and mentorship to business startups. And there he focused on raising capital, connecting startups with mentors, and building resources and support for the Dallas startup community. Mr. Youngblood received his Bachelor of Business Administration in Finance, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Southern Methodist University. Mr. Youngblood, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you, Commissioner Pai, for coming to Texas. I think this is very important, like you said, to get out of D.C. and come to a state such as our own, so I appreciate that, as well as my fellow panelists and the audience and everybody back home in Dallas. I'm really excited to represent the burgeoning Dallas startup community in this important discussion. During my time at Tech Wildcatters, which, as he mentioned, was a top 10 ranked startup accelerator and seed fund, I was able to help over 40 startups grow from idea to full-fledged corporations. These companies all have common threads that help propel them to where they are today. They are able to reach what we call at Tech Wildcatters escape velocity due to a number of macro and microeconomic factors that are at play. These macro and micro factors hold true regardless of the specific type of startup, and I believe these elements are critical to the discussion of how we approach net neutrality and its protection or lack thereof. If we do not take the right actions, then we are at risk of severely hampering our ability to maintain our advantage in these variables, and thus begin the disfigurement and or deflation of our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in the U.S. Since startups are critical to the flow of new innovations into larger U.S. corporations via acquisition and competitive pressures, this could truly turn the tide of economic activity across the board potentially. My goal today is to discuss these variables as well as my opinion on which legal route most effectively accomplishes my goal to allow the United States startup ecosystem to flourish indefinitely. While this is by no means a fully comprehensive list of variables, these are the key identified, especially within the past decade. So macro variables, technological innovations, specifically the cost of computing, driven down by the cloud revolution. The ability to scale quickly and appropriately at any point in time is critical to a startup success. Also, new platforms such as mobile, we all know about that. It's all been within the last decade. Competitive advantages, the United States versus the world. We have access to willing investment, access to willing talent, and acquirers, as well as the cost of doing business has supported that. And we have a growing base of willing entrepreneurs here in the U.S., both young and old. On a micro level, you have to have an innovative concept and idea. You have to be able to execute that idea. That means you have team. You have a great team. You actually have a monetization strategy. And you're able to it's adopted in the marketplace. And you also have to have passion, naturally. All these variables play a part in determining why someone would want to start a company today, how they go about executing on their vision, and ultimately how that startup will impact its local, regional, national, and international economies. But what many do not realize is that any distortion in one of the variables can have an adverse effect on the entire equation. The variables are interdependent. When one falls, it's likely to drag down others with it. The most important variable, I believe, is the cost of computing. The introduction of cloud computing catalyzed an already increasing downward pressure on the cost of computing within the last decade. When startups could finally shift their computing from servers in their garages, if they could even afford to have them, to the cloud, an explosion in innovation occurred. If startups are relegated to an altered connection because they do not have the funds to hire negotiators or to pay a higher flat fee for a better connection, they are immediately in jeopardy of losing any competitive advantage that has to do with the processing of information in the cloud. This ultimately leads to the downfall of the majority of the other variables I mentioned. And I have a quick example that I'll go through. It's 2020. Johnny's startup graduates from Texas A&M and decides he wants to hit the ground running with a biopharma concept. He believes he can change the world by introducing a new medicine that can cure Alzheimer's. If this is 1985, he would have to have access to a big lab. He wouldn't have had a chance to even do this. Today, he can do that because he has access to the processing power. In a net neutral 2020, he would have this access as well. But if we're in a 2020 where there is paid prioritization, Johnny's packets could be slowed to make way for a larger biotech company's processing. This is if he ever even decided to pursue it. Johnny knows that investors want to see results, who want to see results in his area of expertise are investing in European startups who have access to a neutral net. They don't want to take the risk of having their models slowed unexpectedly. They also don't know if Johnny will be able to recruit the appropriate talent in Texas because top data scientists are being recruited by these European companies or publicly traded companies within the United States. Ultimately, Johnny decides he may not pursue the venture because there's too many variables introduced by the unknown nature of network degradation under paid prioritization. So because of this and other reasons, I fully support Title II to be used to protect net neutrality. I applaud the Mozilla Foundation's September 15th comments in front of the FCC, and I refer to that document on specific technical and legal reasons as to why Title II is the way to go. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we will turn to Chelsea McCullough. Chelsea McCullough is the Executive Director at Texans for Economic Progress, a statewide nonprofit advocacy group driven by a core belief that greater access to technology is critical to job creation, innovation, and prosperity for the state of Texas. Before joining TEP, Ms. McCullough served as a marketing director for Empower Labs, a research and development incubator, and she participated in the launch of several entrepreneurial companies, including News Taco, Flash Valet, and Feed America. She also served in the Economic Development and Tourism Division of the Governor's Office, where she participated in the launch of initiatives including Texas One, a program designed to attract businesses to Texas. As a graduate of the Leadership Austin program, Ms. McCullough received the 2013 Ascendant Award for demonstrated leadership in her community. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in advertising from the University of Texas at Austin. Ms. McCullough, we'll be delighted to hear from you.
It is such an honor to be here. Commissioner Pai, thank you so much for visiting our great state of Texas, my fellow panelists, and for the audience. And to the Texas A&M, thank you so much for hosting us. Today I'd like to talk about specifically how rules affect the technology community. As Commissioner Pai mentioned, I serve as the Executive Director of TEP. We're a statewide technology community, and we really focus on three key issues: education, entrepreneurship, and infrastructure. And when I first joined TEP, which was around 4 years ago, when I would say the word tech policy, folks wouldn't get too excited about that. Entrepreneurs were busy building their companies, looking for their next hire, searching for capital. They weren't really interested in what was happening in the state capitol or in the DC capitol, and under a wise bipartisan approach, this was okay. We want everyone engaged, but it was a different time. Now we're talking about net neutrality and the potential of Title II, which is essentially a heavy-handed, burdensome regulation and really federal government meddling where the free market should really do its work. So we want to make sure that as the tech community becomes more engaged, we really clear up the issues and talk about what is truly the issue here. We're not wanting this to be hijacked by misguided arguments of a small minority. This isn't about fast lanes and slow lanes. The internet is working, and it is working well. All you have to do is drive down to Austin or look towards the rest of the state, where you have private companies like Google, like AT&T, like Grande, like Time Warner Cable, all who are regulated very differently, all competing and investing in the broadband infrastructure that consumers are asking for. They're fighting over themselves, trying to figure out who can dominate the headline and who can dominate the market. And in that free market economy, that's when consumers win. And coverage has never been higher across the nation and across the state of Texas. Our coverage percentages are 99%. In addition, connections are getting faster because competition is absolutely prolific. This happens because the technology sector has freedom to take risks. It's light touch regulation and limited government interference that encourages that connection. So today, the FCC has before it the idea that we would go back to 1934 regulations, bringing us back 80 years at a time when Commissioner Nelson was saying it was a very different environment, and certainly not the competitive environment that we see today. So this is a beautiful time of free market chaos, and we don't need additional regulations stifling that innovation. And I have just a real quick example. Week before last, I had the privilege to host an event in San Antonio at Geekdom. And I was talking with the founder of Wiseware, Dr. Gary Wilmick. And he's telling me about this incredibly innovative company that he is building called Wiseware. It is a wearables technology that essentially leapfrogs wearables that we know today. So wearables are things like the bracelets that count your steps, and maybe there's heart rate monitors. Well, this company has that and a consumer focused approach. And so I was asking him about the founding of his company. He told me this beautiful story about his grandfather who had some medical issues and unfortunately passed away due to a fall that was caused by dehydration. So he was inspired to create a device that could measure levels of dehydration that could have potentially extended his grandfather's life. So as he was shopping his innovation around, talking to different venture capitalists, one venture capitalist wisely said, you know what, I'm very sorry to hear about your grandfather, but if you go down the route of making this a medical device, you will be mired in federal regulation for 10 years. You will spend tens of millions of dollars. And if you get to market, well, good luck. The competition probably would have surpassed you by then. Why don't you go the consumer route, make this a fitness device, and then you can serve the same market, leapfrog all of the innovation and all of your competitors, and get to market faster, which is exactly what he did. So it's just a perfect example of federal regulation, unintended consequences, and when that regulation is burdensome and doesn't support innovation, then it gets in the way of the very economy that we are benefiting from today. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for hosting us.
Absolutely. We will next turn to Joe Portman. He is the president and founder of Alamo Broadband in Elmendorf, Texas. Mr. Portman started this company, which is a fixed wireless broadband service provider that primarily serves South Central Texas. In the early 1990s, he founded Alternate Access, Inc., locally owned and operated ISPs in the Seattle-Tacoma area, as well as PDGT.com, which was a CLEC dedicated to lower costs for ISPs in that area. He retired from that life in 2000 and moved back to Texas, where, prior to founding Alamo, he performed consulting and software development work for a vast array of companies, including Keystroke Financial, Schlumberger, and many others. Mr. Portman, we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Commissioner Pai, Texas A&M, everyone who's put this on, the folks at the FCC, and of course, our audience. Before I start my remarks, I want to say I'm honored to be invited to speak at this forum, something I do often, but I feel it's important. I also wish to mention that the views stated here are not necessarily the views of WISPA, an organization to which I belong and support wholeheartedly. That's the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. My name is Joe Portman, and I am the founder and president of Alamo Broadband Incorporated, a WISP, wireless internet service provider, that serves about 500 square miles just south of San Antonio, Texas. We currently serve over 700 customers, many of which had very limited choices for broadband internet service before we came along. Big names, the telcos, cable companies, when it comes to rural areas such as the areas we serve, they don't see the value and they won't invest the capital, at least if it's their money, to build infrastructure and bring service to the people that live there. We, and thousands of others like us, have found a way to do it. This is not my first ISP. I started another in 1994 with 6 modems in a spare bedroom, and I sold that business in 2000 and retired to Elmendorf, Texas to be near my Elmendorf is less than 1 mile outside the city limits of San Antonio, and imagine my surprise when there was no good internet service to be had. And so, after a long and fruitless search, Alamo Broadband was born. Like the majority of WISPs, we use unlicensed spectrum as our last-mile delivery vehicle. We share the spectrum with all the other WISPs and unlicensed users, such as home routers, industrial monitors, smart meters, schools, you name it. It's a challenge sometimes, but we've always found a way. We are completely self-funded, no financial help from the government, no government grants, low-interest loans, or etc. I don't have any research or figures, but my conversations with other WISPs and traffic on the WISP mailing lists indicate that the vast majority of WISPs are similar. We're not unregulated by any means. Like most small business operators, we face numerous challenges on a daily basis, not the least of which is complying with every local, state, and federal government agency that wants a piece of the action. Seems if a service springs up, the very next thing that happens is someone will figure out how to tax it. Shortly after, someone else will start trying to regulate it. I support the concept of net neutrality, although as someone famous has said, it's a non-trivial problem. It's a moving target. The internet of today is definitely not the internet of 1994, and the internet of 2024 will not be the internet of today. In 2010, the FCC adopted a light touch approach. While many small operators were concerned, we nonetheless complied with the new rules. One significant thing the FCC realized was that WISPs face, and I'm quoting here, unique network management challenges because we do not have exclusive use of the last mile link. This means that what's reasonable for my company to do may not be so for companies that use other technologies. This has not changed. In fact, the challenges we face today are greater than those we faced in the past because customers are using more and more bandwidth for Hulu, Netflix, and other video streaming services, and a whole host of other things. As Commissioner Pai stated in his speech at an industry conference just last week, the WISPapalooza, under the FCC's proposed rules, the federal government could look over your shoulders and second-guess every step you take to manage your customers' online experience. You may see it as ordinary and reasonable network management, but someone in Washington may claim it's a net neutrality violation. To keep the network running efficiently, a network operator needs to be free to take any necessary action it deems reasonable to protect the integrity of the network so they can continue delivering quality service to their customers. Internet regulation is getting a lot of attention these days. In fact, I was invited to attend the protest at this very location, all in the name of net neutrality. I'm not big on protests. So that brings us to why I'm really here today. Title II regulation of WISPs and other internet broadband providers. I think it's pretty much a terrible idea, born of good intentions. The phrase unintended consequences comes to mind. Here are a few of the problems I see with the approach. Increased disclosure and reporting requirements of not just our internet practices, but every facet of our business. Small companies such as mine simply cannot bear the cost of filing these items. Our staff is pretty busy just dealing with the loads we already carry. More staff to cover regulations means less funds to run the network and provide the service our customers depend on. I'm also informed by an attorney any violation of these new regulations would not only carry potential fines, but could require damages as well. In the worst case scenario, if you've heard of patent trolling, then you can imagine some of these same people would quickly figure out a way to start trolling ISPs as well. Successful cases would be all it takes to start a landslide in the WISP industry. And here's the rub. The regulations would not really be addressing the core issue, the likelihood that the dominant companies with big market power will use that power to take advantage of small broadband providers. The enforcement process must be fair to small businesses, so I think it's a good idea to eliminate expensive formal complaints and require people to negotiate in good faith with their ISP for 30 days before they can file a complaint. And let's make the sanctions specific. Under the current rules, I don't know if a violation of the net neutrality rules is a $1 problem or a $1 million problem. I can't accurately assess the risk, and investors can't quantify the risk. This raises a barrier to small businesses seeking capital and stifles growth. In summary, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Internet has experienced massive growth since the light touch regulatory approach was adopted, and absent any landmark changes, it will continue to do so. Title II and the more onerous and costly regulations will work against the goals of encouraging broadband deployment to all Americans. We're not common carriers. We don't need to be regulated as common carriers. As Commissioner Pai said in his speech, the concerns of small businesses need to be front and center in this debate, not an afterthought to an ideological crusade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Portman. We will now turn to Mr. Edward Hennigan, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Data Foundry, based in Austin, Texas. Data Foundry provides retail and wholesale data center outsourcing, internet bandwidth, and managed services. The company serves thousands of enterprise customers across a variety of industries, including energy, technology, healthcare, and financial services. He joined Data Foundry as employee number 1 at its inception in 1994 as a Texas-based ISP named Texas.net. He's written numerous publications on various topics, including an article on how data centers can help oil and gas companies meet their high-performance computing needs. Mr. Hennigan received his bachelor's degree in physics from Bradley University. Mr. Hennigan, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pai. I want to reframe the issue a little bit. We're here under the banner of talking about regulating the internet. So where I work, we buy internet bandwidth by the truckload. We buy directly from internet backbone providers. We have no issues with those backbone providers. They don't snoop, they don't slow or block our traffic in any way, and they assiduously maintain tremendous capacity on their backbones and their pairing ports. When I go home, it's a different story. The issues with residential broadband providers are specifically why we're having this conversation here today. The risk to internet openness only exists at home. Thus, the challenge to the open internet is not the internet, it's the access provider. We need to reframe the issue away from regulating the internet to regulating the access. So, in the NPRM, the goal of the NPRM is to seek a way to implement legally enforceable rules by which it could stop broadband providers from limiting internet openness. Openness is just the tip of the iceberg, though. We've had a lot of talk so far about how great success we've had in telecommunication growth and internet growth in America. Y'all don't know it, but we have terrible internet access. Maybe you do. In the OECD surveys, America is in the bottom 10 to 20% for price per megabit. We have been falling. We used to be at the top. We are among the few developed countries who have increasing broadband internet costs, despite technology which should be driving the cost down. Customer service is awful. The two most hated companies in America are the ones with the lowest customer satisfaction ratings are two of the biggest residential broadband internet providers. Golden Frog, a cloud VPN provider, recently documented a case where an internet access provider was actively intervening into an email transaction and prevented that email transaction from enabling encryption. So this is an internet access provider twiddling bits in the middle of a transaction to prevent it from turning on encryption. We've got numerous other issues that we've seen, ad insertion with NebuAd and R66T. We've got large consumer ISPs using immobile customers as pawns while playing revenue games with content providers like the way Comcast and Verizon did with Netflix. Now, if we've got such a great deregulated free market, then what is going on here? How do we end up with such terrible service despite what is being touted as a free market in internet service? The answer is we don't have a free market in internet service. The 2005 deregulation ended up being protectionism for incumbent internet access. We have no market. We have no true market for broadband internet access. Most homes in the U.S. have no more than two. Many have one option for broadband internet. And when you do have two, the choice is between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So, with the proposed NPRM, it may or may not solve, depending on loopholes and interpretations. It might prevent Comcast, Verizon, or AT&T from crippling Netflix compared to their own video on demand service. It might prevent carriers from resetting BitTorrent connections. But the NPRM will definitely not address carriers blocking encryption. It won't bring the USA from the bottom of the OECD broadband rankings. It will not stop carriers from shaking down content providers. It will not prevent carriers from snooping traffic and inspecting ads, injecting ads into web browsing. And it's not going to improve customer service. On top of that, it's going to create problems. In particular, this opens the door for carriers to snoop all of our traffic under the rationalization of preventing discrimination. And it invokes the regulation under Section 706, which invites the FCC to start regulating internet applications, the edge providers, as if they were somehow the problem here. And finally, it implicitly and enshrines and institutionalizes the cable and landline duopoly. So the alternate approach, which we support, is Title II regulation. We've had tremendous success in the electric and gas utility markets with Title II style deregulation, where you have a single conduit into your house, which you can use to choose a wide variety of providers. My specific experience in this type of area is with Texas.net as a dial-up ISP. I brought a prop. I have the catalog of internet service providers from 1997 that you could choose from at your home. Compare this to the choices that you have today, and you realize what little market we have. So, in summary, since my time is up, we endorse the policy of classifying last-mile Layer 1 networks, not the internet, under Title II, imposing common carriage and open access requirements on those networks in order to create markets, which we love, for internet access, minimize the regulatory complexity, and best align service provider and consumer priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hennigan. We will now turn to our last but certainly not least panelist, Robert Hunt, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Business Operations at GVTC, which stands for Guadalupe Valley Telephone Cooperative in New Braunfels, Texas. GVTC provides telecommunications services in South and Central Texas. In July of 2009, Governor Perry appointed Mr. Hunt to serve on the board of the Texas Department of Agriculture's Texas Broadband Task Force, which promotes broadband deployment and adoption in the Lone Star State. He also serves on the boards of the Texas Telephone Association and the U.S. Telecom Association. Prior to joining GVTC in 1993, Mr. Hunt provided engineering and consulting services to the telecommunications industry. He received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. Mr. Hunt, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Pai. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to serve on this panel and for you coming to Texas and also this great university. I am very proud. I have a recent Aggie graduate, and I've got another son. Whoop, I know, that's a good thing. And I've got another son here in his sophomore year, so we're very engaged at Texas A&M, great university. I do hope you find this panel useful and some of our discussions as well as you develop the internet rules that we will follow for the future. I am Robert Hunt, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Business Operations at GVTC. GVTC is a telephone cooperative formed in 1951. We provide voice, video, internet, security monitoring, and Ethernet transport services in an area north and east of San Antonio. We do provide the service in predominantly rural areas, so we understand those challenges, which makes it very costly to serve those areas. However, we recognized many years ago that our ability to deliver broadband services was critical to our success as well as the economic growth in our service area. We began delivering fiber to the home over 10 years ago, and now over 65% of our customers have access to fiber-based services. 85% have access to broadband, according to the FCC's definition of broadband, and 95% have access to what we call high-speed internet service. And those percentages will grow every year. We recently announced our GigaRegion project, which is really the first of its kind. We partnered with 3 cities in our area and are now able to serve gigabit services to businesses and residential customers in our service area. But how the FCC elects to regulate the internet will certainly impact our ability and our willingness to deploy additional fiber to the home and gigabit services. There are many who argue that service providers like GVTC must be heavily regulated under Title II, as we're financially motivated to block content as well as restrict and discriminate against other content. I'll point out that we have been in the information delivery business since we started. Originally, it was a phone call, then it was a cable TV service, then security monitoring, internet access, web hosting, online data backup, and the list goes on. Choosing to restrict our customers' use of their internet service is really contrary to our business purpose. In fact, the recent record shows that it is the content providers that really do have the ability to restrict access. Viacom, the owner of MTV and Nickelodeon, blocked Cable One's internet customers from accessing Viacom's websites because Cable One would not pay the cable carriage fees. We believe really that the content providers have significantly more market power than the service providers. We support an open internet, one in which all customers have access to all of the information, the services, and the applications that are available. I point out that Title II regulation has traditionally been used in a monopoly environment. We face competition from major cable company, wireless ISPs, cellular companies, and satellite. From the National Broadband Map shows that there are 32 service providers in our service area. Creating new Title II regulations would impose new regulatory burdens on all service providers, and most of which have never even heard of it and are completely unaware of its requirements such as rate regulation, tariff filing, universal service funding, accounting standards, reporting requirements, and the list goes on. Others claim that Title II regulation will prohibit fast lanes and slow lanes. First, to my knowledge, no service provider has ever engaged in creating fast lanes or slow lanes, and certainly GVTC has not. And no evidence exists that it's likely to happen. And on the contrary, Title II regulations has allowed companies like GVTC to establish service level agreements for those customers willing to pay the extra money. Title II regulation does not address this issue to the extent there even is one. So how should the FCC proceed? We believe that Section 706 of the Act is the proper method. The court, in striking down to portions of the FCC's 2010 Open Internet Order, provide a reasonable path using 706. States the FCC is empowered to create rules governing broadband providers' treatment of internet traffic, and that they will preserve and facilitate the virtuous circle of innovation that has driven the explosive growth of the internet. And we are confident that the rules established under Section 706 can support an open internet, protect consumers, and meet the Commission's objectives. So again, I look forward to our further discussions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Before turning to the more interactive part of our forum, I just wanted to announce a few housekeeping matters. First, I'd like to let the audience know that if you'd like to explore in more detail our panelists' testimony, they have submitted written statements that are going to be available on the FCC's website, fcc.gov, as well as the same web page as the live stream. And it should be posted there soon if it hasn't been posted already. Additionally, those who are not with us here in the room can still participate by submitting questions on Twitter. The hashtag that we have set up is FCC Texas. Finally, you can always submit comments to the FCC itself in the open internet proceeding. The docket number is 14-28. Last but certainly not least, I would like to reserve some time for audience participation. So if the timekeeper could please let me know when it's 11:30, we'll be sure to shift no later than then. Before I ask my own questions, I would like to open the floor up to panelists who would like to respond to anything that your co-panelists have said. No responsibility to do it, but if you would like to respond to something that you heard from one of your colleagues, Ms. McCullough, sure.
Well, I just wanted to talk about, what is the true motivation of each of the issues that we've talked about? And I have great respect for every single one of the panelists here, and of course for you, Commissioner Pai, because I believe that we're all talking about the same thing eventually, which is more, better, faster for more people so we can be more competitive as a state and more competitive as a nation. This is a great time of disruption. I see this every single day as I travel around the state. You have doctors turning into entrepreneurs. You have teachers turning into technologists. Everything is flipped on its head, and in that chaos, business models are disrupted too. So everyone's trying to figure out what is in their best interest in the new economy. Folks are trying to cut costs as much as they can. So let's look at the streamlined argument. What is in the best interest of those who provide access? It is to provide more access. And as new competitors come into the market, let's not forget that everyone is competing against each other to provide more, better, faster, which is entirely the point, and the people who really win in that argument are consumers.
Anybody else?
Can I respond?
Sure, Chairman.
I want to discuss the comments made about the electricity infrastructure. So these two industries are very different. And when you look at Title II, it is, set up to regulate monopoly, to make sure. So you have government, like the Texas PUC, sitting in the place of the competitive market. But when the Texas legislature unbundled the electric market in 1999, effective in 2002, all of that investment that had been made by those companies had been made under rate of return regulation, all of it. So when they unbundled it, made the generation competitive and made the retail side of it competitive, they left the poles and wires regulated. But those poles and wires had been built under rate of return regulation. It's a very different situation in the communications business and in the video business. Some of the infrastructure that's in place was put in place under old rate of return regulation, but the more recent infrastructure was actually put in place, by private companies making private investments. So if you look at cable, for instance, and providing telecom service and high-speed internet service, those were done under franchise for providing cable service, but they were not under the old traditional rate of return regulation. So I just want to respond to that. And when we're looking at Title II, what that means. What it means is somebody like the state or the federal government would, those companies would come in for rate cases. All the risk would be borne by the end-use customers instead of the company investing the money. And the commission would, or the FCC would set those rates, and that risk would be shifted.
Any further responses? Well, Madam Chairman, your answer actually gives me a segue to the first question, which I will pose to you. You mentioned in your opening comments that Google, AT&T Cable, and others are investing a lot of money to bring high-speed broadband to cities in Texas. In your view, would they make those investments if broadband were treated like a public utility?
No, I don't believe they would. I mean, I think we would, in essence, I think, would we be going backwards? We'd be going not even backwards. We'd be going to a place we've never been before when, since the internet really has become active. So, no, I don't think they would, because they wouldn't take the risk. They would only make investments that were approved. You know, every time somebody wants to build a transmission line in Texas, this commission, the PUC, approves the building of a transmission line. First, we decide if it needs to be built, if there's need for it, and then we decide where it's going to be built, and then we decide how much money the company that builds it's going to receive. So that's not a real, as you can imagine, it works in electricity because you don't want to have a bunch of transmission lines. But in this market, you can see with such a vibrant market, it really would slow things down a lot.
Mr. Hennigan, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on that same question.
Yeah, you know, kind of unpack a lot of that. What we're talking about here is the last mile is where the issue is. You know, there's the common rejection of the Title II argument is the investment. And I mean, on one hand, I think there's maybe a failure of imagination. The people who would be building network to residential locations, they are now doing it with a lower expected return over a longer time period. But the key here is they are not the customer. Or, I'm sorry, the residential address to which they're building is not the customer. That's not who they're wooing. The networks that would be built with the customer being the ISP or the data access provider, like a TexasNet or any number of ISPs who would be more than thrilled to run over that line and utilize that line to sell a wide variety of applications and access over that line. And what we need to see really is we need to see a credible FCC who can put the regulatory regime in place that businesses will trust will be there over a long time and not be dismantled piece by piece, for example, 1999 through 2007. And within that framework, I absolutely believe you would have infrastructure utilities who would be building out and be funded by the businesses that would be buying from them in order to serve the customers at the end of the line. And one other note on all that, why does it make any economic sense to have overbuilding? Why does it make economic sense? Why is it good for society that multiple network providers have to bear the same costs over and over again to build out to every address when if one infrastructure provider did that and provided access to that network to everybody, it's going to be far more cost effective and cost efficient for society as a whole. You're not paying back nearly as much capital on a per household basis if you do it that way. If Time Warner Cable today all of a sudden had access to AT&T's network, then they don't have to drop another penny in the ground to do another build to reach a whole boatload more addresses, and they can start selling their services over that immediately. So the questions about, well, what happens to the investment? Where's the investment come from? I really think that the questioning and the answers are so framed in an old way of thinking that does not properly reflect what that world would really look like.
Thanks, and actually that is a helpful segue into the next question, which I would pose to Mr. Portman and Mr. Hunt, respectively. What do you think of that vision of the infrastructure that Mr. Hennigan just outlined, both from the perspective of wireless ISP and from a smaller telephone cooperative?
Wow. In our society and in our life, we have certain shared resources, the roads, waterways, water, electricity. And then along came phone lines, and there was only one provider of phone lines, and we know how well that worked out. So the idea of building a shared network infrastructure, almost, I don't want to use the word communist, but a communal approach to providing the last mile to the home. I see a couple of problems with it in the business model. The first is, I, as an entrepreneur, I control my network, every inch of it. I can oversee the quality of it. I can take care of the problems that happen in it. There's no one to turn to. The buck stops with me. So that's one problem I see with it. Second, if it's really going to be so cost-effective and great, then in the end, we're going to reduce internet access and provision of internet access to basically its lowest common denominator. Who can do it the cheapest? And as we all know, I don't think the cheapest is always the best. One of the things that we sell along with our internet access is quality customer service. But then again, you know, that's just the way that I do business. When we sell something, we guarantee it, we stand behind it. If the customer's not happy with it, give them their money back and let them try somewhere else, which is not really a harsh way to look at it. So I think that in a utopian world, it would be awesome if there was fiber into every home from the get-go, and any entrepreneur could fire up a plant somewhere and begin providing access to it. I just don't see how it can happen.
Mr. Hunt?
Yeah, I guess, you know, looking at GVTC, our business plan, we certainly understand Title II, and we understand Title I, information services. You know, that it's interesting, you know, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I'm not sure whether we're Tweedledee or Tweedledum. But in any event, we'll talk about it later. But it's interesting to think that regulation would somehow spur investment in that last mile. I just don't see that anybody that's an entrepreneur that says, great, give me an opportunity to go into a fully regulated environment where I've got oversight at the FCC, the PUC, the state all these issues, the cities. I'm just dying to get in there and create the accounting standard and regulatory group to be able to survive that. I just don't realistically think that that's going to happen. So Title II regulation is going to stifle it. Second, when you begin to talk about, I think it's talking really about GVTC having invested capital into this fiber to the home, that we would somehow share that with another entity. Well, you know, that's really not what private capital is looking for. We're looking at meeting our customers' need, going into a competitive marketplace, providing those goods and services that our customers want. It's easy to say let's impose Title II on the service providers. Well, let's turn that discussion around. I think it would really be nice if everyone that wanted to do data hosting could just piece part your data center out, and let's apply Title II regulation to that, and Rackspace could utilize your data center at some cost that they want to pay you, or you could do it. But so again, this concept of the last mile and imposing new regulations is not going to drive anybody to be able to willingly to go out and invest additional capital, to think otherwise. And I would point out, when you go back to 1997, for those of you in the audience still remember that, this was dial-up internet. Dial-up internet meant, back to 1997, dial-up internet was the existing landline phones were there. You could go in and put in a rack of modems somewhere in the network, but the loop from the customer was all there. You didn't have to build network plant to the customers and cables and facilities. So the concept that somehow creating new regulatory environment, we're going to get back to a book this thick of internet providers. What you really want is content. You want applications. You want the innovation, and that's what the internet's been able to do as it's been regulated currently.
So I want to turn in a second to the question of innovation, but Ms. Hannigan, I do want to give you a full and fair chance to respond since you got the double barrel approach on either side.
I guess I'm two guy. Yeah. I don't even know where to start. So as Data Foundry, as a co-location hosting provider, a Rackspace can come and buy a cabinet from us. Absolutely. Absolutely. So can anybody. So we're accustomed to that.
But I think the question is, you are able to develop your rates that you price that at. Under Title II regulation, the government would define those rates, terms, and conditions. You'd have tariff approvals. You'd have regulatory oversight. So you have a commercial agreement. You're imposing Title II regulation, government style, on local loop providers versus hosting. So I think it's not fair to say that, you know, it's equal footing.
Right. We don't have a natural monopoly. We don't have an economic natural monopolies are well studied. We don't have an economic scenario where, building out with a large fixed cost gives us very small incremental costs relative to our competitors, and we're not in a scenario where overbuilding is practically all wasted dollars. It's not a good analogy. I agree with you, really. A key issue here is distinguishing between the layers of the stack. What we support is doing the Title II regulation at the last mile network connection. Again, not the internet. And so his comment that what people want are content over the internet, absolutely. And the content is broad and diverse and competitive and does not need regulation. It's that on-ramp that gets to it that needs the freedom to have competitors to get you out there. Different ISPs would have different levels of performance, that have different customer service levels. There's a lot to differentiate them as a separate layer on top of the physical plant. That's really, I think a lot of the objection comes down to sort of a lack of imagination about what this world could really look like if we have a regulatory body that's committed to it. Where there's a will, there's a way. And if businesses trust that the regulatory regime would stay in place for an extended time, they would absolutely jump on board into that new world and make it happen.
We'll certainly pursue this particular issue further, but I do want to talk about not just the infrastructure, but the innovation that happens over that infrastructure. And to that extent, I wanted to turn to Mr. Youngblood and Ms. McCullough. Mr. Youngblood, one of the things you talked about is that you're seeing a lot more innovation and investment in the startup community in Dallas. And you yourself talked in your written testimony, something I found interesting, the concept of escape velocity, allowing entrepreneurs who previously might not have even gotten off the ground to hit the ground running and then to make a timely exit. You mentioned also mobile as a platform for innovation. I was wondering if you could discuss whether you think the rules, any net neutrality rules should be the same for wireless and wireline providers, or should we draw a distinction as the FCC did in 2010? And it would be either way.
Certainly, and I'll touch just very quickly on Mr. Hunt's comment. I do believe that the content and the companies providing content, or ultimately whatever that is, whether it be a B2B startup or whatever kind of company, that is, he talked about Title II not necessarily protecting that, as in that's why I support Title II, is because ultimately if there is controlled access where you can have fast lane, slow lane, for instance, which it's been proven that if you do increase fast lane, it does degrade the network. You're at risk of entrepreneurs. They basically go to the path of least resistance. So they'll see that and go to a different area. So basically what's happening is you're protecting entities that are already big, like Google, Facebook, Apple. These companies are great, but you're not, the innovation then drops off.
Can I just interject a quick question on that?
Yeah.
So just to be clear, if the FCC did not adopt a rule banning, say, pay prioritization, how likely do you think it is that ISPs would, in fact, engage in that practice?
I rarely deal in absolutes, but it's an absolute certainty, 100%, because it's true. Because it's in their shareholders' best interest. I mean, they're going to make more money through that system, and so they're doing what's in the best interest of their company, which makes sense. That's why it's needed. As far as mobile, I mean, I'll defer as far as the actual physical layout and what has been discussed here, but all I know is that we don't know what's going to happen in the future as far as future networks, how the internet's provided, and I believe that a protection of mobile networks is also critical. So yes, I definitely support both of those. I know that there's different legal precedents in that area, but from my perspective, we need to have protection on both those areas.
Okay. And Ms. McCullough, so one of the things that Stuart has talked about, that Chairman Nelson talked about too, is the environment, the regulatory environment for startups in Texas. And I was wondering if you could share your perspective on how you see the internet market operating in this state with respect to startups. Is it a good one, or are there challenges?
Well, I think it's important to talk about the nature of each of those things. So I completely agree with you, Mr. Youngblood, that entrepreneurs move quickly. And, think about the fact that iPads didn't exist 5 years ago, and now we can barely walk out of our front door without going like this: where's my iPad, where's my phone? So who knows what's going to happen in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, and you can't take the speed of that sort of innovation and then say, oh, but wait, we need government regulation in the middle of this conversation. One moves fast, one moves slow. Both of those are very intentional, and that doesn't work together when everyone's trying to rush to the finish line. So we're seeing in Austin just this week, this is a local issue, of course, but the city of Austin gave permission to Uber and to Lyft to operate in the city of Austin. This is a very, very big deal. And in that instance, it's not about putting regulation in place or debating future regulation. It's unpacking regulation that was already in place. And that's a big deal for Austin consumers, and everyone's really excited about it. Well, the entrenched cab companies aren't too excited about it. But I think limited regulation supports competition and innovation as opposed to the other way around.
Right. And
Yeah, I'd love to respond. I mean, it's been public record that I've supported the Uber model. I believe that that's a great example of disruptive innovation. The problem is that if Title II is not used to protect it, it's the cable companies that ultimately decide who's the winners and losers here. It's the providers, because they are the ones that will be negotiating with the startups to negotiate, can we use this faster, lane or not? So it's not a question of if the government is getting in it, it's do you let innovation occur at its own speed, or are you going to let cable companies essentially decide who gets access to what speed and how fast can you innovate? That's the real issue.
Okay.
Is it appropriate to respond
please do.
kindly and
Sure,
with absolute
sure.
respect? And I am no policy wonk. There are many people on this panel who can really talk to the nitty-gritty details around this. My purview is more the statewide technology community, but as I understand it, Title II doesn't protect this notion of fast lanes and slow lanes. Fast lanes and slow lanes aren't in effect right now, and everybody having more, better, faster is in everyone's best interest. So, perhaps we can talk afterwards and,
Sure.
Kind of explore that a bit more.
Absolutely.
But to my understanding, the issues don't match up.
And in order, for time's sake, I'll be happy to defer to the Mozilla Foundation's comments to the FCC on that actually is true and that actually exists.
So can I just,
Can I just
Chairman
respond?
Nelson,
So let me just say, Title II and any sort of regulation of a utility is economic regulation. So if the PUC is regulating, we look at what the costs of providing the service are and who are the cost causers. And the rates that are paid by the customers are going to be based on what they use. So it seems like there's comparing apples and oranges here, because what really is being sought here is access, and it seems like it's access based on concepts that aren't maybe economic. But Title II, any regulator is going to look at who the cost causer is, what the cost is, and what's going to be paid, because you don't want cross-subsidization in different customer groups. So that doesn't take away those issues, and it doesn't relieve the obligation on the regulator to look at those issues.
and that's a question that I wanted to explore as well. What would the effect of Title II be on ISPs in particular? And if I could turn to Mr. Portman for a second. You talked in your opening statement about the cost of compliance. I was wondering if you could amplify a little bit on that. What's the big deal? You said you already comply with a panoply of regulations. What exactly is it about Title II regulation in your business?
Well, having been a victim, well, not victim, yeah, a participant in Title II, I did form a CLEC in the late 90s and had to deal with the entire panoply of Title II regulations to operate that business. The cost of bringing that CLEC to life was around $400,000 in lawyers' fees and about $500,000 in equipment. And of the lawyers' fees, probably 2/3 of that was setting up to deal with all of the regulatory agencies that would need to be reported on a regular basis. So that's a huge amount of money for a tiny 13-man company to invest. Just so I could have one Class 5 phone switch and serve one customer, me. From that experience, I can guarantee that it's going to be at least one person's full-time job to do compliance, to do filing, reporting, deal with any complaints, deal with any audits, any kinds of things like that. And it's not going to be a cheap person. It's going to have to be somebody who's well-educated and knowledgeable about regulations. So right now, we have a staff of 5. And adding a person or 2 persons to that staff would greatly diminish our ability to grow out and reach new customers. So that's the effect it would have on us.
Just to let you know, my term ends in 2016. I'd be more than happy to pitch in if you need somebody at that point. Mr. Hutt.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I think it's easy to say Title II and apply that, but you know, I would point out that Google is actively building fiber out in the United States. When they deploy their fiber, they are not offering a Title II voice product. They refuse to offer a voice product because it's regulated under Title II regulations. They do not want to build networks under Title II. I mean, they can speak for themselves, but their actions are you cannot get a Google voice product out there because it is regulated under Title II. And I think what Joe was talking about, you know, we live in this world. When he would become regulated under Title II, he would have to abide by Part 32, which is the FCC's Uniform System of Accounts for his accounting standards. He'd have to change all of that. He'd have to begin to do separations under Part 64, Part 36, Part 69 that separates all this. We do this. We understand this. And we've got staffs and attorneys and lawyers that drive our costs up, and we understand this as well. When he came to offer his retail product, he would go through a rate of return, go to the commission, either the FCC or PUC, determine what his proper authorized rate of return was, look at his expenses, look at his plan investment, have a cost analyst do that, file that tariff. In 30 to 60 to 120 days, that tariff may be filed and approved. And then on top of that, you've got the reporting obligations. That is an entirely different issue and business opportunity the way the internet works today. If he chooses to add a feature or functionality to his internet offering, says this now includes security, he just adds that. In the future, under Title II, I envision that would be a tariff filing with cost support, regulatory filing. I think the FCC, it's an $800 charge to file a tariff. Those are the kinds of things when you talk about Title II that you want to apply to every broadband service provider. We understand Title II as it relates to phone. We do not deal with that as it relates to internet. And we are adamantly opposed to any sort of Title II because of the impact and the cost. It will not drive your cost down. It will drive cost up from internet service.
Sorry, Mr. Hagan.
So the security services that he would like to offer, the new and innovative and creative security services he'd like to offer on top of his network, that would be in his deregulated business, not the regulated business. So that's the whole computer inquiry structural separation. I read the computer inquiries again recently. Wow, fascinating stuff. Seriously, in 1966, sitting there saying, well, geez, you know, these computing services they're becoming all cool. Wow, these telecoms, they might take advantage of that and slow down the other guys' computing services and subsidize their own computing services, you know, replace computing services now for website or content. And you had the exact same thing. And in 1966, the FCC saw this coming, and they put the structural separation in place to distinguish between the natural monopoly, which would be regulated, and the competitive markets, which would not be regulated. So the security service would specifically not be regulated and would be free to blossom and bloom on top of a dependable layer of regulated layer 1 access to the home. I had one other point, I completely forgot it. So I'll move on.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I had forgotten about going to the Utility Commission and filing the tariffs. Thank you for reminding me of that painful experience. I would foresee that if we make any change in the basic fundamental structure of the service that we deliver, if we change the speeds, committed information rates, service level, we would have to file those?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't want to focus only on Title II because obviously there's been a discussion about another regulatory path. I thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about that, and that's what's known as Section 706. And Stuart, I was just curious about the advocacy that we've heard from some parties urging us to go down that path as opposed to Title II. And I was wondering if you could discuss why you think Title II would be the better way to go. And then Chairman Nelson and Ms. McCullough, too, if you'd care to follow up as to what you think the effect, positive or negative, would be from 706.
Sure. To my understanding of 706, basically it would green light paid prioritization, and that's my main concern here. And I believe that's why honestly I support Title II. That's pretty much plain and simple, basic description. Yeah.
You don't get more concise than that. That's great. Chairman Nelson.
Well, I guess we've had a lot of discussion about Title II, and I just think 706 would be, first of all, I don't think changes should be made personally. And before any changes are made, I would respectfully request that the FCC determine what problem they're trying to fix. Because just in our discussion here today, we've had, there have been lots of comments about what problem we're trying to fix. Because I've got questions like if we go under Title II and what we're doing is saying that last mile is a monopoly. Are we going to say the last mile of AT&T is a monopoly? Are we going to say the last mile of Time Warner is a monopoly? Or instead, are we going to build an entire new last mile? That's not real clear from the arguments we've heard today. And if we're calling the last mile of any of the people in the market currently, regulating that last mile, I think there's a takings argument. If we're building a new last mile, then I think that increases costs. So I think to the extent you do anything, 706 is the appropriate path, but I would respectfully request that before you move forward doing that, you really define what your problems are and what the best solution would be.
And Ms. McCullough, did you have a view on Section 706?
Well, just echoing Commissioner Nelson's thoughts, and of course has a much greater understanding of the logistics and the technicalities around these issues. But to me, I just think of it in terms of very simple analogy, specifically related to last mile, is if last mile is the exit and everything else is a grand highway, well, then there's still congestion at that last point that slows everything down, and what I really want to do is get to where I'm going. So my understanding of 706 is that it enables the internet to work as it is working today, and it is working just fine. Open internet and access for everyone is absolutely what we all support, and so we have a lot in common there. I don't think Title II is the way to mitigate that, but that's my position.
Okay. And Mr. Hennigan, I noticed in your testimony that, in your words, Section 706 invites the FCC to start regulating internet applications that rely on carriers, as if they were, as you put it, the physical bottlenecks, just like incumbent network providers. What do you see as the problems with the Section 706 approach in terms of its effect on over-the-top companies or startup companies?
So Section 706, as I understand it, is the FCC's mandate to encourage broadband adoption, and to the extent that the FCC decides that a way to encourage broadband adoption is by maybe forcing different privacy policies or forcing different content delivery policies by edge providers or application providers, then the FCC now has, a rationalization or justification for going to those content edge providers and saying, well, you need to do your business differently. And, one of the repeating themes that we have today, you hear it from me, kind of, and you hear it from everybody else, is, well, this is onerous. Either Title II is onerous, or in my perspective, 706 is onerous. With under 706, one of the specific questions under 706 is, okay, exactly how do we regulate to achieve the outcome that we want to have? And what ends up happening is you end up going down this rabbit trail where you're constantly having to fine-tune and play with and get more and more detailed about exactly how this regulation is going to work. If you're saying that, well, the access providers have to be non-discriminatory. Well, then maybe we need to make the web servers non-discriminatory somehow too. And the problem is that it's a false equivalency because there's a huge diversity of competition on the content and application provider side, and regulation there is truly, the Pandora's box in creating untold complications about how it would work, whereas we don't have the same level of competition, despite repeated comments that we do, on the access side. And so if we start regulating the access side under 706, I guarantee you the incumbents are going to say, well, it's not fair, woe is me, if you're going to do this to me, you got to do it to everybody, otherwise it's not fair. And then you don't want to talk about killing creativity and innovation and technological advancement. That's what will happen when you do that.
Okay, I want to focus, we've been talking a lot about the effect of regulation, but I do want to focus a bit on what's most obviously important here, which is the consumer experience. And to that extent, I was struck by something that you said in your opening comments, Mr. Portman, about, look, I have a quality service that I want to guarantee to my customers. And you also mentioned that customers are using more and more bandwidth for things like Netflix and Hulu. I was wondering if you could describe just briefly what the use of streaming services and other high bandwidth applications means for you in terms of managing the network.
Okay. Back in the early days of dial-up, long before Hulu, Netflix, and so forth, we had modem hogs. It's just people who would, for whatever reason, tie up a modem all day long. And even though they weren't actually using it, it's not a concept that really translates to today, but we had to have a network management practice back then to try and make sure that our modems were available to all of our customers. We kept a nice fat ratio of about eight customers per modem, and we were the first unlimited service provider in the Seattle-Tacoma area. We didn't charge by the hour. And so we had to begin network management back then because we had to manage a limited resource. In other words, if everybody wanted to use it all the time as much as possible, then the cost would have been a lot higher and we would have had very poor service. So we fast forward 20 years to today, almost exactly 20 years. October 1994 is when I started that thing. And now we have Netflix and Hulu and whatever, and these are what we call data-hungry services. They eat all they can if you let them. So our infrastructure is, again, limited. We're in a rural area. We're operating with equipment that can only deliver X amount of bandwidth to X number of customers. And as these customers consume this bandwidth, again, on an unlimited plan, we have to begin to figure out ways to either increase the bandwidth without driving our costs through the roof, or to manage the bandwidth so that everybody gets a fair share of it. So right now, we have a really fast network. Bandwidth to all of our towers, all of our APs are lightly loaded, and so our customers have a nice experience. But as people want to do streaming in HD, as people want to do multiple streams, as people want to consume more and more of the bandwidth, our pipe is only so big. And as more and more people come to the trough to drink, we have to figure out a way to give them more. And right now, technology hasn't matched the demand. Not quite yet. So that's where we're at.
Good to know. So we could definitely continue this conversation for quite a while, but I do want to open up for audience participation. There are going to be two gentlemen on either aisle who will have a microphone. If you have a question, please see one of them. They're both wearing ties, suits, just like me. And I also want to make sure that we get at least one question from social media. So if our mic holders could let me know, that would be great. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name and where you're from, that would be terrific.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Tish Stringer. I'm from Rice University. I teach filmmaking.
Hi.
Maybe I'm in a very different perspective than a lot of our panelists here because I find the discussion of consumers versus citizens a little off-putting, and the discussion of company interests versus creativity and innovation online a little off-putting. So like I said, I'm a producer. Net neutrality means I don't need a license to produce and distribute content as I do with a TV or a radio station. I teach filmmaking. My students use the internet to distribute their films, build work portfolios, raise money, promote their screenings, submit to festivals, access and use archives for free use art. If the new rules favor large corporations, the little creative producers will struggle to make their voices heard. The airwaves writ large supposedly belong to the citizens of the United States, but we see them dominated by the same few large corporations. The same will be true of an internet regulated like other telecoms. Immediacy of a free internet for publicist publishing has been an incredible benefit for information sharing in cases of disasters and for social movements. I support net neutrality because I support a plurality of voices and free access to information as a cornerstone to a healthy democracy. As panelist McCullough stated, open internet and access to everyone is and should be the goal. Thank you.
Thanks. And I should mention that if any of our panelists would like to respond to any of the questions, that one or any of them, feel free. So Mr. Culler, Mr. Youngblood, and that, anybody?
Sure. Well, I just think the statements were well prepared, and thank you for voicing them. Creative expression and investment in infrastructure are two very, very different things, and they actually go hand in hand. So the more we invest in the infrastructure, and I keep using the very colloquial term more, better, faster, the more that you and your students who are doing awesome work at great Rice University, big fan, have the ability to do it. So thank you.
Great. Sir.
Howdy, I'm a student here at Texas A&M, and I've got a question for you.
Sure.
It's been alleged that the FCC yielded on its original pro-net neutrality stance after an aggressive astroturfing campaign put on by the lobbying industry for the telecommunication industry. Recently, via Washington Post editorial, Commissioner Pai publicly attacked a research project meant in part to measure and identify astroturfing campaigns on social media. So in a procedural sense, how can we, the consumers, trust the FCC and its decisions when folks who work to help us understand the potential forces behind those decisions are publicly attacked by the FCC leadership?
That's a great question, so I'll go ahead and tackle it because I was there. So in the context of the FCC's open internet proceeding, we took meetings from a wide variety of people, and anyone who wanted to meet with the FCC, in particular my office, was free to do so. I have a long-standing open-door policy from the minute I had the privilege of serving as a commissioner. Folks have emailed, tweeted, called me, and have been in my office relatively soon thereafter. You can certainly look at my statement on the NPRM that we adopted. In terms of process and in terms of substance, I didn't necessarily share the view that that was the best way to proceed, especially because I think that broadband is a critical part of our nation's future economic success, and that's why I want to make sure that we have a very open, a very transparent regulatory administrative proceeding, and we adopt the right rules in the end. And that's, frankly, part of the reason why I'm here, is because I don't want to be sitting just in the headquarters at DC listening to people who have strong interests on any side of this particular issue. With respect to your question about the Washington Post op-ed editorial, the issue in that case was pretty simple. Do you think that the federal government, given our current genuine scientific priorities, should be spending $1 million on a project that is designed according to its own website to sniff out and to squelch what they call social pollution on Twitter? It seems to me Twitter is a great online platform for public discourse, and the last thing the government should be doing is funding ways to figure out how to minimize what that same website calls social propaganda. That's not something that I, frankly, as a citizen, let alone as a commissioner, who genuinely loves the First Amendment and free expression, wants to countenance.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Dubois, and I'm with the Internet Innovation Alliance. There's been a lot of debate this morning about whether regulations, the so-called Title II rules, should apply to broadband providers to prevent them from creating fast lanes on the internet that could favor some edge or content providers over others. And I wanted to get your thoughts. Is there any evidence that an internet provider has tried to prioritize traffic not directed at a consumer's request? And also, I had one other question. I'll start with that.
Sure. Well, so I should emphasize that I'm primarily in listening mode at this point, so I would defer to our panelists if they have particular examples they want to discuss. I'll simply say from my own end that I think at the end of the day, the legal standard the FCC has to adopt here is the substantial evidence standard, as the courts have called it. And so for us to adopt regulations that are designed to counteract a particular competitive harm, we need to make sure there's substantial evidence in the record. And so I think that's part of what the FCC is seeking to do in the past few months and in the coming months, is to try to gain as many facts as possible about how competitive or uncompetitive this marketplace is. And so I don't want to put forward any particular examples at this moment, because obviously we're still in the deliver process. But obviously Mr. Hennigan talked about a few. If any of the other panelists would like to contribute, I think their perspective is much more valuable.
There is a gorgeous chart that shows when pre and post negotiation with, I believe it's Time Warner Cable or Comcast, Netflix speeds and other speeds of actual content providers. It literally, it spikes the day after negotiations ended. So I recommend that you go try to find that chart. I'll be happy to tweet it out later. And also go read, again, the Mozilla Foundation's comments to the FCC. There are many examples of prior and what will happen if this goes forward.
Sorry, just the other question. Could Title II prevent this theoretical harm?
These particular harms. Well, that's part of the question, is whether or not, well, I should pose it to the panelists, actually. So, actually, if you, Mr. Portman, Mr. Hennigan, Mr. Hunt.
I would say that from a Title II perspective, as I mentioned in my statements, we do provide service-level agreements on different products. Ethernet transport services we offer for cellular wireless backhaul out to towers. We have 3 different service levels. I don't know if you would categorize that as prioritization, but we have that tariffed in our interstate tariff. I don't see, I guess I don't understand how we could not, if we chose to do so, file a similar tariff at the federal level to handle that. I would say that we do not do anything to monitor the network, change packets, prioritize packets. We have our information or disclosure about that on our website. We comply with the FCC rules, but we are not in the paid prioritization business. Again, we think an open internet is something that we truly support, and paid prioritization is not something we see doing.
Gentlemen?
So I've got some very specific related experience. The paid prioritization is definitely, I don't know that as a specific carved out fast lane, it's a little bit of a red herring. What is really happening is technically not the same, but it has been going on for 15 years or so in my direct experience. Data Foundry, we have a sister company called GigaNews, and as GigaNews, we're a global broadband Usenet services provider, feeding high volumes of traffic to broadband consumers around the world. So we have been in a similar situation to Netflix, well before Netflix was around, where we had high volumes of traffic that we had to get to end users globally. And through this experience, we found that there were some very specific carriers, some very specific internet access providers who were incumbent monopolies typically, or came from an incumbent monopoly background, who very much appreciated the power that they had by having a relatively immobile eyeball customer base on their network. And what they would do is they would not upgrade capacity with peers, and they would allow congestion to occur at peering points. And when a company like us, who wanted to provide a high-quality service to our customers, we had to find a path out of all the variety of paths to them. We had to find one that happened to be uncongested at the time. And they would, it was a sort of a balkanization. These would shift and go away. And the only way that we could ensure that we would provide high-quality service to our customers was if we went directly to that carrier and bought direct access to their customers. So this has been happening. AT&T did this extensively in the early 2000s, back when Comcast was exclusively behind AT&T after the Comcast buyouts of the AT&T old cable networks. Internationally, Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom, Telefonica are the classic triad who do the exact same thing. And I've met senior executives at Deutsche Telekom who talk to me how they frame this practice and how they execute on this practice. So what we saw with Netflix between them, Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T, previous incumbents or incumbent monopoly histories. They know how to take advantage of a relatively immobile customer base to strong-arm content into paying them for access. So I appreciate that the Greater Valley Telephone Co-op doesn't do this, but to echo Joe's point, why not? Why not take advantage of the power that you have? Where are your customers going to go? So this internet fast lane is really, it is happening. It has been happening. It just happens in a slightly different way than the terminology would lead you to believe. And I'm sorry, I'm going really long, but the question was, how will Title II affect this? Well, Title II will not affect it in any way, shape, or form from a onerous regulatory perspective where you'd have to file paperwork to prove that, I don't have a fast lane or what have you. The way Title II would fight this is what we saw when we were trying to reach broadband customers in, say, France or the UK, where they had Title II style deregulation shared last mile. In France, we saw very high throughput years and years ago, well before America saw the same kind of fiber to the home. And we didn't have any problem getting to them. And the reason was there was competition at that last mile. And when you had, with a French ISP who had a customer base, they actually had to make them happy. Because if they didn't make them happy, they could change their providers at the drop of a hat. They'd say, oh, shoot, my Giganews is slow. Let me fire my ISP and get a new one tomorrow, and now my Giganews will be fast again. So Title II solves the problem through consumer choice, or shall we say citizen choice. I like that word, citizen. It doesn't solve it through onerous and heavy-handed micromanaging regulation.
Mr. Portman, did you want to say something about that, or?
Well, first, all of our customers are beloved by Alamo Broadband, and we hate to see them go anywhere else. We actually do everything in our power to make sure we can deliver what they need. The few times that we've had to let people go, even when they had no alternative, is there's just no way to work out a product that we could deliver to them that would satisfy their needs. And unfortunately, that's just the facts of business. One of the things about France and Germany and England and all those other European countries is the density of population per square mile. It's got to be at least an order of magnitude more dense than, say, Southwest Texas. So bringing a shared infrastructure into cities that have tens of millions of people seems to be a lot more feasible than bringing it into a freshly new incorporated city of Sandy Oaks of 1,300 homes. While, like I said, I support the idea in theory, I don't think the practice is going to be possible. Back to prioritization, I wanted to talk about that. Prioritization is something everybody does. You just don't get around it. As a matter of fact, I'd be willing to bet that you prioritize VoIP. You don't?
We don't offer VoIP.
Okay, but well, we don't offer, but we prioritize it because a lot of our customers have service with other companies like Vonage, and they mark their packets as VoIP, and we honor those markings and give them priority because we want our customers to have a good experience, even though it's not our particular product. So we're forced to do some prioritization just based on the fact that the network at any given time can be subject to a DOS attack. We had one this morning, 800 megabits per second, lasted 11 minutes. Now we have 2 gigabits of connectivity to the internet, but you stick 800 megabits per second on one leg and things are not going to go right. But with prioritization, voice service was uninterrupted. So it's a fact of life that we're going to have to do some sort of massaging or managing of the network in order that the most important applications, and I consider VoIP important because we have customers out there that all they have is a VoIP phone line for 911 service. So if they need to get a hold of fire or sheriff or whoever, we want to make sure that it's going to work. So prioritization exists, will exist, and I think is going to continue to exist. But it doesn't need to be the kind of prioritization. We don't do it to put extra money in our pocket. That's the kind of things that we see from the large major providers. They say, hey, I've got 10 million customers. Okay, Mr. Netflix, you want to reach my customers? You pony up a little extra. I think that is wrong.
So before we go to the next question, I want to make sure we have a chance for at least one person on Twitter to ask a question. If our folks can just let me know if and when we have a question. But first, let's go to the gentleman in the middle of the room.
Thank you. My name is Bill Kelly. I'm here from Houston, Texas. And I noticed, by the way, that the duopoly in Houston is not represented here. We have Comcast and AT&T. And the comments of Mr. Hennigan resonate with me because I'm on the board of this high-rise community of 200 homeowners. Mm-hmm. And I have negotiated with both AT&T and Comcast over our services. We had bulk services that we've now canceled, by the way. And we now own, for the first time, the cable inside our building, the coaxial cable. Where I live is in the Montrose area, where we fill most of a city block. Two of the streets that are on that block, one of them on Kipling Street underground, is fiber optic cable for AT&T. On Yoakum Street, another street that borders our community, in the telephone lines, or the poles, is fiber optic cable for Comcast. So it's not the last mile for us. It's like 30 yards or something. And we even offered to share the cost of bringing fiber into our buildings, and we've gotten stiff-armed on that. The other thing that I've noticed in the Houston area is just 2 blocks from us now, they're building a 30-story high-rise rental building, and there's 12 cranes I can see from my balcony. I mean, the boom is everywhere. And I've called and inquired, are they putting fiber optic in the new buildings? And the answer is no. They're putting copper in them. In other words, the new technology is not going into the new buildings. And I think the FCC should look into that and find out what's stopping this duopoly from doing that. And by the way, the service in our buildings is not good on Comcast. We get constant buffering on Netflix. We get congestion at certain times of the day, and you can't get on. The internet freezes up. So this idea that our internet service is terrific is not correct.
Would anyone like to comment?
I think you should talk to a WISP. If I were in Houston, I could get you service.
Okay, this gentleman's going to ask a question, then I do have 2 quick Twitter questions to share.
Great.
Okay, and this is more of a comment than a question. I married an Aggie a couple weeks ago. And we moved
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Yeah.
We moved to a place a couple miles from the DFW airport, and I had one choice for my internet, and it wasn't the bandwidth I wanted, and the previous resident, the address had committed fraud, so I had to go into the place to get the internet. It took me about 2 days to get internet, and I'm not satisfied with the service. My electricity, on the other hand, I had a million choices. I took less time, I had more choices, and I want my internet to be more like my electricity. I think that the companies will provide that if it's more like the electricity.
Anybody?
Should thank Chairman Nelson. Have the opportunity.
You're welcome.
In terms of Twitter, we have 2 questions, one from kind of each side of the debate. The first one I think would be better geared towards Mr. Portman and Mr. Hunt. And Jason Knight from @BinaryBana asks, everyone agrees the Title II would be a burden for ISPs, but he asks, what about the benefit of having access to more customers? And then I think this would be best for Mr. Hennigan and Mr. Youngblood, Mike Wendy asks, what the people favoring Title II specifically want, and lists a number of statutory provisions, 201, 202, 203, 208, 222, 251, 256, et cetera. So those are the two questions we have from Twitter.
So why don't we start with the first one, which was to Mr. Portman, Mr. Hunt?
I think ones because the questioner is saying everyone agrees this is a burden for ISPs, but what about the consumer side of it and the benefits of access?
Sure.
Well, you know, again, I think the issue you bring us up as well is how do you move forward in the broadband world? And the question is, you know, will Title II generate additional companies to go out and compete with the duopoly? And you have to ask that. When you answer that question, I don't believe you can say that Title II will spur new companies to go in and compete in your marketplace. So the concept of Title II is going to provide more customers. I don't see that happening, and I certainly don't see Title II generating private capital to go into a fully regulated environment to deploy and compete with multiple providers that are in that service already.
Mr. Portman, any comment on that question?
Would you mind repeating the first part of the question?
The questioner says everyone agrees there would be burdens on ISPs from Title II, but what about the benefits for consumers?
Well, in our particular service area, Title II I don't think would offer any benefits unless there was some way to spur other companies to come out and build more infrastructure. Where we serve, there really is no infrastructure. We are the infrastructure. And all of it built basically out of my pocket with my vision. And we decided to serve this particular area because nobody else was going there. You know, if I were serving in downtown San Antonio and Title II would magically give me access to use Time Warner's network or AT&T's network to compete against with them, that's an entirely different business model, and one that, frankly, I'm not even interested in because I don't want to be the lowest common denominator. I want to go out and serve a need. We found a spot where there's a need, and we're doing our very best to serve it where we are, and Title II wouldn't be of benefit to us, and I don't think it would benefit our consumers or our citizens. Although I can state with a certainty, we serve a lot of people who are not U.S. citizens. So I don't think Title II would benefit either side of the equation in the area that I service.
If we turn briefly to the second question to Mr. Youngblood and to Mr. Hannigan, which are what particular provisions within Title II, 201, 202, et cetera, would you support or not support?
Please go ahead.
Again, I'll defer again to the Mozilla Foundation's in-depth analysis on this. Again, my biggest thing is the pay prioritization protection against it. I'll have to go back and I'll get that handle and I'll make sure to follow up with them.
Okay. Mr. Hannigan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, on the numbers and which ones which. That's a level. We have position papers. I2 Coalition submitted an excellent position paper in the comments, which I encourage everybody to go read. You know, but what do we want out of Title II really is ultimately consumer choice as a replacement or in lieu of regulation to specify what the optimal internet access is for everybody.
Okay. And do we have another question from the audience? Hi.
Hi. So I'm all the way from New York City. Luckily, I'm here.
From New York? Wow.
From New York. But luckily, I'm here working on a master's in computer engineering.
Oh, I thought you was going to be very flattered you came here just for us. This is great.
Maybe. So I understand the concerns and the things that it takes to manage a network. But in New York City, we only had, well, where I live, I only had a choice of Cablevision as a provider. And that's in New York City. And now coming down here, at my house, I only have a choice of Suddenlink. What's to protect me from being extorted by them to slow my speeds and to increase their price? I mean, when I go through the Suddenlink server to connect to a website, I'll average 30 megabits per second. I'm paying for 55. Now, my roommate can go through a VPN and get that 55. Why would I have to pay for a VPN to get this increased speed that I'm already paying for? Mm-hmm. Why are the speeds up to? Why is the speed up to 55? I'm paying for up to 55. I'm only getting 30. What's up with that? Like,
So despite the fact that it's a Yankee question, we will entertain it. Anyone on the panel care to comment?
I mean, is this a rhetorical question, or?
Well, and that's the perfect point, is that regulation doesn't spur that competition. It doesn't spur that level of innovation. So the question around Title II is, why would we go back to 1930 to prepare for an unknown future, which is going to be full of consumers exactly like you saying, we want more, better, faster.
But unfortunately, the real truth is it just hasn't happened. There is no competition. I mean, we've had multiple examples here. I think that's pretty evident. I mean, I'll defer to the other people on this comment. I think comment over there.
Well, and perhaps,
But to answer your question short and sweet, nothing prevents them from doing whatever they want, except, hopefully, they have consciences. And in dealing, I know, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
I think we can imagine one more question here.
All right, go Dreamers.
Let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
In the arena of competition, that would protect you. If there were some other person who could reach you who had infrastructure, the competition between at least, and in my idea, healthy competition starts with 3 competitors. Since you only have one choice, protection outside of regulation. And unfortunately, the regulations that they want to impose wouldn't actually protect you, because they could file, and maybe even succeed in filing, to do that kind of discrimination, using the reasonable network practices excuse. So I think what needs to spur the adoption of more broadband choices is not maybe shared infrastructure, but maybe investment in technologies that can reach more people in these urban areas, something I'd be terribly interested in. So that's my comment.
Well, can I just say something real
Chairman
fast?
Wilson.
Since everyone else is giving their anecdotal stories, I'll give mine, which is I had one provider, and I live in Austin. I had one provider. I wasn't happy with the service. I fired the provider. For a period of time, I didn't have any cable. I only had high-speed internet, and I relied on, Netflix and those types of things. And then eventually, I went with another provider. So it's hard for me to imagine living in an area of Texas where you don't have multiple providers to choose from. And like Joe said, if you don't, the whole concept of competition is somebody else will enter and start providing service.
Sir.
Good morning. Thank you for the good discussion, a wonderful discussion. My name is Dr. Justin Carlson. I'm the president and CEO of a 3D data cloud community, and we're going to start moving gigabytes of data very frequently. So there are a couple of questions that I had. Mrs. Nelson, Chairman Nelson, making sure we ask the right question, and then Joe Portman about prioritization, and Dr. Heinigen about where we are in terms of access to internet. It seems like we're arguing about Title II and specifics 40706, but why is it the United States is so low on the OECD for access to internet and broadband? It seems like we're arguing about this small point and forgetting the bigger issue that if we just raised the bar and had a lot more access, then like say Germany or France or Canada for that matter, that we would actually, this problem really wouldn't be as an issue. Is that clear and concise, or is that too broad-based of a question? How can we just raise the bar and put us up at the top of the OECD for internet access?
Sure, and I know Mr. Kennedy talked about this. You wanted to direct it to anybody?
Well, I guess I would say, I think there's other evidence out there that is not, I think there are different opinions on the speed in Europe. And again, I'll give you anecdotal. I have a niece who lives in Germany. I don't have interruptions in my internet service. She's a Facebook friend of mine, and her internet's always out. So I don't know that. I'm leery, being a Texan, to look to Europe for guidance on anything, quite frankly.
Anybody else?
Sorry. I'd like to comment on that. I think we're really talking about really 2 separate issues. If we go back to what started this, the courts rejected portions of the open internet order. That's what has started this. The issue really on the table, we've got the transparency was kept intact. The court said your transparency issues, in other words, we need to disclose what network practices we have. It said the issues about blocking and content, those issues we need to talk about, and reasonable discrimination. So the FCC has before it those considerations. How does it put that back in place? So I think those issues about the ability to access content, we need to do that. The ability to ensure you can connect any device, we need that in there. We need proper network management practices, and we need transparency. The real question that's being thrown out is, by some, is we are very concerned about paid prioritization in the future. In other words, companies like us that are service providers would be able to go out and charge different entities for different services. In Title II, I keep saying, does not address that issue. We can tariff that if we wanted to. I don't believe that under Title II we would be prohibited from doing that. So the question is, 706 or Title II. I believe the FCC can take Section 706 and put in all of those safeguards that were described in the Open Internet Order and address paid prioritization under Section 706. That deals with the issue that's before the FCC. A lot of the issues that we're talking about here is, I don't like my speed, it's not fast enough, that it's congested out there. That takes the investment of private capital by companies like GVTC and the others to be able to go out and expand the network, put fiber out there. Those are issues that we as companies want to do, be able to do. No one likes to be able to, have customers call in and complain and tweet about your poor service. That's not in our best interest. Title II will not fix and encourage the investment in the network. That, I think, is the difference that we really need to talk about. Title II will not do that, and you can use 706 to address paid prioritization, the open internet issues, and we can move forward as an industry and set this beside us and move forward.
Mr. Portman, did you want to say one final word on that?
Mostly what he said. Why America ranks so low in the global internet speed issues? Like, Hong Kong's #1 right now? What's the square area of Hong Kong in square miles? Something like 100. How big is America? We have the same population as Hong Kong, and was it 1,200 times the area? Somewhere around there? Maybe 1 million times the area? The problem is that if you measure it as a whole, then yes, America may rate lower. Some areas are very difficult to serve. Part of the problem is that in Hong Kong and other companies like France and Germany and England and Italy, those all started off as nationalized telephone companies. And all that infrastructure was built with nationalized tax dollars. And then it was opened up to competition. That didn't happen here.
So I'm informed that the time for audience questions has run out. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up the forum, but I do want to emphasize what I said in the housekeeping remarks, that if you do have other questions, comments, concerns, you can always file those with the FCC in the Open Internet docket 14-28. You can find it on the FCC's website, fcc.gov. The hashtag is obviously going to be out there as well, and so we'll try our best. Hopefully our panelists can take a look at those too when they have a minute. We'll try to keep this conversation going. But I do, unfortunately, have to wrap it up. I do want to say, once again, thank you to our panelists for taking so much time out of their busy lives to come here and talk about this important issue. I'm honestly in awe. We were talking before the event started, and some of them came from quite a ways away to be here today, and I really do respect their time and their insights on this. And this particular issue is so important. We were talking before about how in the old days, never before the era of the smartphone, it's hard to imagine how we were connected with each other. You had a few broadcast channels, there's no internet, you had a telephone line, et cetera. But now, with the advent of smartphones and this always-on broadband connection, I think, as I said in my opening remarks, that broadband is really becoming inextricably intertwined in American life. And that just heightens the importance, honestly, about this issue and what the FCC is going to do on it. So I want the audience to know, the people watching on the live stream to know that I value your input, the input of our panelists. I hope that my colleagues and I work collaboratively in the future to come up with a regulatory framework that protects the American consumer's broadband experience going forward. And I think it's absolutely critical to keep that conversation going. Additionally, I want to recognize Congressman John Flores for being here. He represents College Station, and now, typically in Washington, the agency bureaucrat should pay respect at the very beginning of his remarks to his congressional overseer. I hope you'll accept my apology for the oversight, Congressman, but we do value your representation of the district and your being here today. With that, the forum will be closed and the metaphorical gavel will now sound. Thanks.
Sorry.